Hello, my friends. Today there is some very interesting news from the US. Rutte said that Trump really has shifted his rhetoric on Russia because he realized that Putin doesn't want to stop.
The president changed his mind. I think the president has been very consistent since February when he broke the deadlock, starting the talks with President Putin. But clearly, Putin is not willing to play ball. And we saw yesterday when President Trump, or the day before yesterday, when President Trump spoke about the paper tiger. And the whole day yesterday, we had the Kremlin saying, no, we are not a paper tiger, we are a bear. Well, you know, if you're a bear, you don't have to announce yourself to be a bear, because everybody will notice. So this shows a lot of weakness from the side on the Russian side. And clearly, the president hit a nerve here.
After comments like that, Medvedev is going to be furious. Rutte also added that they're seriously considering sending arms to Ukraine in a steady flow, although Europe, as before, will pay for them.
Are the U.S. weapons going to the proper channels to get to the battlefield? Final thought, Mr. Secretary?
Absolutely. And this is what happened mid-July when President Trump called me and he said, hey, Mark, we will open the floodgates again of U.S. weapons, both lethal and non-lethal, into Ukraine. But guess what? Allies will pay for it. And I said, you are totally right. Already 2 billion have been committed in packages for Ukraine. The other packages are now pending. So you will see a constant flow of American weapons into Ukraine, paid for by allies. And I think in conjunction with the sanctions, in conjunction with the 5% target, what we will overall spend as NATO on our collective defense, this big foreign policy success of President Trump at the The Hague summit of NATO in June, this collectively puts the pressure on Russia to get serious and stop doing this.
Thus, it's clear that the US has started speaking out more harshly against Russia, and Trump once again stated that Russia is losing many people, but achieving nothing.
But Russia spent millions and millions of dollars in bombs, missiles, ammunition, and lives, their lives, and they've gained virtually no land.
As we can see, Trump continues to speak very harshly against Russia, and that's very encouraging. So overall, now we are waiting for the Russians' reaction. But it looks like the pressure on Russia will only increase. Today, Trump spoke with Erdoğan and asked him not to buy oil from Russia. Unfortunately, for now, Erdoğan hasn't given a clear answer.
He does an amazing job in his country. And we've had tremendous relationships, both having to do with war and having to do with trade. And I guess today we're talking about both. I'd like to have him stop buying any oil from Russia while Russia continues this rampage against Ukraine.
Meanwhile, Lavrov continues to claim that NATO countries attacked Russia and that supposedly Russia is only defending itself.
Through whose hands NATO and the European Union want to declare have already declared a real war on my country and are directly participating in it.
Overall, Lavrov is trying to twist obvious facts. Meanwhile, the exchange of strikes continue. Yesterday, the Ukrainian forces carried out strikes on gas distribution stations in the Russian-occupied Luhansk region. There was also a strike on a chemical plant in Russia's Krasnodar Krai. This indicates that Russia's weakening continues. Now, let's move on to the frontline situation, starting with the Dobropillia direction. Here, despite the Ukrainian forces breaking through to Novopavlivka, the Russians still have a fairly large area, almost 2 kilometers, where they can retreat. And retreating there would be easier than trying to push through Ukrainian territory where they haven't been before. Additionally, the Russians have been trying to break through toward Sofiivka from the east for several days. This was reported by the General Staff of Ukraine and confirmed by video evidence. Yesterday, there were also attempts to break through from the west, so it's clear that they're trying to encircle the Ukrainian forces, attacking from two sides, since they still have supply lines through this narrow 2-kilometer corridor near Novotoretsk. If the Russians didn't have supplies, they wouldn't have been able to stay here for a week. Or more surrounded, so they would have already been destroyed by drones. At the same time, almost daily, the General Staff reports that the Russians are effectively attacking, including assaults on Zoloty Kolodязь, Vilne, and Nove Shachove. So it's clear that the Russians continue to receive reinforcements and are carrying out assaults on settlements. Around Sofiivka, they are clearly trying to encircle our troops to disrupt Ukrainian plans. Moreover, the Russians have superior numbers and are pressing as hard as they can, while the Ukrainian forces are trying to conduct limited counterattacks. Ukrainian soldiers report that in the Pokrovsk and Dobropillia directions, the situation is difficult. In the Pokrovsk direction, the situation remains extremely difficult, especially in the southern part of the agglomeration. The Russians continue sending small infantry groups to infiltrate our lines. In the northern part, on the Dobropillia direction, it's a push and pull situation. Things might change only if Novotoretsk, Razino, and Novoekonomichne are secured. But in the last settlement, the Russians have made gains again, capturing part of the village. The Russians continue regrouping forces across the whole direction. By the way, this process has been delayed because many Russian units were actually not combat ready, even though they reported as such. It was expected that between September 15-20, the Russians would begin a wide front offensive and bring up reserves to the second and third lines. But for now, they've postponed it and are still carrying out preparatory actions. Of course, that works in our favor, giving us more time to prepare. The only question is how that time will be used. As we can see, the Russians still hold the initiative here and are trying to advance. But there is still hope that the Ukrainian forces will eventually cut off this direction completely. We're still waiting. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians haven't reduced the activity either. They continue assaults around the city of Rodinsk and Krasny Liman, attack Novoekonomichne and Lysivka, and are breaking through to the outskirts of Pokrovsk near Kotline and Udachne. There have been no major changes in a day, but the situation remains very difficult. In the Novopavlivka direction, the Russians are breaking through near Horihove and toward Alexandrograd, but there have been no changes over the past day and the fighting continues. In the direction of Pokrovske, the Russians are breaking through near Berezove and assaulting Novogregorivka. So far, there have been no new breakthroughs, although the situation remains very difficult. Over the past day, the Russians have made several advances in this area. In the Huliaipole direction, and the Russians are breaking through toward Poltavka from Olhivske, but they have had no success and the front line hasn't changed over the past day. In the Zaporizhzhia direction, the Russians are breaking through toward Novoandriivka, but elsewhere there is some little activity along the front line. In Stepnohirsk, the Russians haven't been able to advance so far, although heavy shelling continues. In the Kherson direction, the Russians are trying to break through on the islands, but the Ukrainian forces are successfully repelling them, and there have been no changes to the front line here. Shelling of the right bank also continues. Now moving to the Kostiantynivka direction. Here, the Russians continue the attacks near Chasiv Yar, assault Stupochki, Oleksandro Shultine and Plashiivka, and are breaking through across the fields toward Yablonivka and Poltavka. So far, there have been no changes to the front line, but activity is very high. Russian FPV drones continue to operate actively across the area. In the Kramatorsk direction, attacks on Orikhovo-Vasilivka continue, but the Russians have made no progress over the past day, and the front line remains unchanged. In the Siversk direction, the Russians are assaulting Yampil and Dronivka and trying to break toward Serebryanka. Activity here has slightly decreased, and the Russians are not advancing further. The Ukrainian forces continue to repel all attacks. In the Lyman direction, the Russians are assaulting Zarychne, breaking through near Kolodezi, and attacking Drobyshevo, Novoselivka, Shandrigolove, Novomykhailivka, and advancing toward Olhivka. However, over the past day, there have been no major changes. Ukrainian soldiers report that significant problems could arise here soon. Lyman direction. The threat of a serious strike is growing. Don't think I am trying to scare you or confuse anyone. Every key point must be assessed based on the realities of the front. First, I want to highlight Zarychne, which is practically captured. Only a small area remains to fully secure it. I expect the Russians to start regrouping because breaking Lyman's defenses without serious preparation will be difficult. Clearly, the Russians will move westward and near Stavky. They are gradually advancing south toward the village with small gains. The area of Dorylove also remains critical. It's vital not to lose this settlement because its loss could trigger battles on the approaches to Drobyshevo. After that, heavy fighting will begin northwest, north and northeast of the flag positions. North of Yampil, along the forest, the Russians will also try to approach the southeastern and eastern parts of the town. They are already probing defenses near the Medova railway. I repeat, this is not exaggeration. It's a responsible assessment, and we must properly repel the Russians. In the Borova direction, the Russians are assaulting Novopavlivka, but the Ukrainian forces are successfully repelling all attacks, and the front line remains unchanged. In the Kupiansk direction, the situation is difficult. The Russians continue to push into the city near Pishane and are assaulting Kolesnikivka. Activity is high, but so far they have made no new gains, and the Ukrainian forces are managing to hold the defense. In the Velykyi Burluk direction, they reported a loss of the village of Odradne. Hasn't been confirmed, although the Ukrainian forces have already shown how they are destroying Russian forces in the village. We are still waiting for official statements. The situation here is gradually worsening. In the Kharkiv direction, the Russians are not conducting new attacks, and the situation remains stable for now. Meanwhile, fighting continues in Vovchansk, but the Russians have made no gains. In the Sumy direction, there is little activity. The Russians are trying to advance, but the Ukrainian forces are successfully repelling all attacks, and the front line remains stable. Meanwhile, the Russians no longer know what to say after Trump's new statements.
When the U.S. president's public statements are, let's say, somewhat contradictory about how to build relations and how to conduct dialogue, how are you supposed to work with the American side in those conditions? Do you have a recipe for that?
No. Well, you know, there are public statements, and there are contacts through closed channels. and we take into account the signals that are sent both publicly and through closed channels, all of that is reflected in our position.
But the rhetoric, today again, literally again, Trump says that Putin let him down. And he's been saying that repeatedly in recent days.
Yes, well, yes. At the General Assembly, he's talking with different leaders to some degree. Maybe he's playing to them, I don't know. But the picture is much more complicated, I would say.
It's clear Ushakov simply doesn't know what to say and is coming up with various excuses. And Trump said that Russia's economy is heading to hell.
They have put it all out on the line. Their economy is going to hell. They're bombing the hell out of everything, and they're picking up a very little territory, if any. In fact, they're losing some territory. So I think it's been very bad for the reputation of Russia. This war should have been over. If this were our war, we would have had it over in 1 week.
Meanwhile, Zelensky says drone production has reached a very high level, so exports to the US, Europe, and other countries will begin.
Yes, we're primarily talking about air defense. Yesterday, we got good signals about commitments from the president and his administration regarding air defense. And second, we have powerful production. There are already over 300 companies. Actually, we have 500 if you count all the tech companies. I think this is a new direction for our business and economy. There are about 30 very large companies ready to be partners. I think this year we'll open exports of our new technologies only to countries we can count on, not to enemies or countries that have ties to our enemies. So we'll open a platform and an export office in the US, we'll open in Europe, we'll open in the Middle East, and today I received an offer from a large African country to open a platform in Africa. So I'm focusing on that. This is export during wartime. Such opportunities are free, but we need more funds for drone production. I want to export the technologies and set up production to raise funds for domestic needs to produce scarce long-range drones.
Friends, share your thoughts about this in the comments. And that's all from me, so please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all the latest news. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Bye bye.